Welcome to Alchemy Uncensored, a podcast presented by Alchemy Search, a team of professional financial and tax recruiters. Our podcast is dedicated to providing valuable insights into the financial and tax sector of the UAE by discussing the challenges and opportunities faced by employers and job seekers. Alchemy Uncensored is the perfect podcast for those looking to gain a competitive edge in the finance, accounting and tax industry of the UAE. Stay informed on the latest job market trends, developments and conversations to stay ahead of the game. Tune into our podcast to be part of this insightful conversation.
I'm Wiam Kamil, Principal at Alchemy Search, the only finance and tax recruiter in the UAE, and I'm joined today by Steve Drake, co-founder and partner at Middle East Advisory Partners, an organization established in the UAE supporting UAE regional and international clients deal with the challenges faced in scaling businesses. Primarily focused on owner-manager and SMEs, Steve and the team comprise of senior experienced professionals, either with a Big Four background or from a senior cross-functional corporate roles. With experience across areas such as finance, operations, human capital, IT, sales, and supply chain, Steve helps businesses to overcome obstacles during their growth phase and has helped multiple companies in multiple industries break through. Alchemy and MEAP are partners, and we have worked on some clients together to advise on recruitment gaps or hiring needs across the finance function. Today, we will be discussing what Steve has seen from his rich experience happen again and again in small businesses. So if you're a small business, you don't want to miss hearing it from the expert himself. So Steve, without further ado, welcome to the Alchemy Uncensored podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, and I appreciate being invited. I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's a really good setting that we have, and I think quite an interesting subject to talk about, just because there's a lot of SMEs, a lot of small owner-managed businesses in the UAE that I think would benefit a lot from someone like yourself that can give a lot of that info. The way I like to start these things all the time, I don't want to jump straight in. I want to give a little bit of taste over your background, what you've been doing on your side, just to give it a little bit of a human touch so people know what's going on in the back end, right? So you were a partner at Big Four.
That's correct.
Which Big Four?
Oh, you want me to name them? It's not a secret. It was PwC. Yeah.
Okay. And you've ever since moved on, and was there a reason you decided to leave the Big Four? I mean, being a partner at a Big Four is quite an accomplishment. A lot of people thrive and want to accomplish that in their career. What was the reason you did that?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. I spent 26 years in all with the firm, 13 as a partner here in the Middle East. And I enjoyed pretty much everything I did with the firm. I worked all over the world, Asia, the Americas, across Europe, and they were all great experiences. And then came to the Middle East in 2007 with a challenge of establishing a new business unit within the firm, and really enjoyed that, loved it. But I think throughout my career, whether it was a fantasy or reality, I always had the urge to do my own thing and be a bit of an entrepreneur, which is difficult to do when you're ultimately in a corporate. So I think the time was just right, stage of career, stage of life. Kids had grown up and flown the nest. It was time to do what I wanted to do. That was create our own advisory business.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And from a service line perspective as well, you've done a couple of those. It's not like you stuck to one for 26 years. So can you just give a little bit insight on that? Like
Sure.
Which service lines?
Well, I started as an auditor. Yeah.
As they all do.
Back in the 90s. So I'm a UK chartered accountant by qualification. And spent about 5 years in the audit practice. And then after that, I was still in the UK at the time. I joined our capital markets firm, which is primarily a listings business. And that's when I got international exposure. So I worked on quite a lot of quite significant overseas projects that were listing projects, working with the client to help them realize that listing ambition and to help them through the issues they face in doing that. And did that for probably about 13 or 14 years. And then latterly, I looked after the Middle East firm's risk business, risk advisory. So that's areas like corporate governance and controls and processes. And it was also the firm's internal audit function. So in terms of things that businesses need and professional services provide, I've had quite a lot of exposure across different lines of service. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a big differences as well. I mean, like capital markets, risk is totally also, it's like totally different service lines. But in a way as well connected, because you need all that governance from that side to do a listing to begin with. So
correct. They're interrelated.
and it's not really easy to move from one service line to another in a big four, is it?
It can be. Yeah, it can be. There's quite a bit of flexibility to support people's progression desires and next stage of development of their life, and that includes moving around the network as well. Generally, Big Four quite good at enabling staff to go and experience different territories, whether that's short-term secondments or longer term. So, yeah, no, mobility and cross-functional working is sponsored.
Yeah. Many of our audience and people that will be listening to this will probably be in your early footsteps, maybe in a Big Four, maybe deciding to move from a Big Four. So what would you say are the pros and cons now that you've seen kind of how to deal with a smaller business and what it's like to be in a Big Four? You know, if you could just give like a quick, maybe one or two things that are good and one or two things that are bad.
Well, they're quite different experiences, but they require similar skill sets. So I would always encourage, from what I try to do within Big Four, is encourage the ability to do different things. So being able to move out of an audit business, I don't mean that specifically to move out of an audit business, but to move on to do different things. And also the ability to work globally, work on different projects. So I think the larger firms are very good at enabling that because of the size, the network they have, and as I said, the willingness to support mobility. So that's great, and I've always thoroughly enjoyed that. But as I've said, kind of doing your own thing and doing something that's smaller and more bespoke, I think there are positives to that. I think there are positives from a client perspective to that as well. You know, whether it's Big Four or a large corporation, they tend to be big beasts. Whereas when you're a smaller beast, you can be more flexible, you can be more bespoke in terms of what you do with clients, and you can also be a little bit broader in terms of what you do as well. So I'm not really giving you any cons. I'm giving you pros to each because I genuinely think there are pros to each, and therefore it's down to what individuals specifically want themselves.
Yeah, like I feel that smaller advisory business, it's tough to run a small advisory business. It's not easy because, there's always going to be, the bigger guys, the larger beasts that, are out there, and they will always be out there. But have you found that in the UAE, companies are more susceptible to using smaller advisory businesses, or do you find that they always go to the Big Four or one of the bigger brands, or what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's different markets, different segments. So we aren't a business that are looking to compete in the Big Four space. There's a Big Four market, and that's well tried and tested because they're by definition big. But there's a sector of the economy, whether it's here or globally, that are our SMEs, they're owner managers, and they don't necessarily have the resources to be able to deal with the larger firms. And therefore smaller, more boutique firms, but who have the skills and the capability to deliver, I think there's a very clear market for that. And that's really the reason we established the business, to, if you like, support the small guys, and to be able to provide that bespoke service that a boutique organisation can. Yeah. By definition, more nimble, generally more nimble, more flexible in approach. And that's the market that we seek to serve. So we're not looking to compete with the larger firms. We're looking to fill ultimately a gap in the market.
Yeah. And your clients, they are not only UAE based, they're all over from what I understand, right? Are you also in touch with maybe companies that want to come and set up in the UAE and things like that as well? And do you help them through that?
We do. We're not specifically company formation. There are existing businesses that do that. And we have preferred partners who would support with that. But absolutely supporting inbound overseas entities who want to set up in the UAE in whatever format that is. That could be rollout of products. It could be acquisition of existing businesses. There's different ways to do that. It's always helpful for those entities to be able to rely upon and trust somebody locally who can help them navigate the way to do that, best way to do that.
The UAE right now is attracting a lot right? From a business perspective, which is an exciting time for advisors, for recruiters, to help them through the journey. And I think that one big thing for them is to, learn the lessons that maybe others have made a mistake in, or actually know how to go through the whole business environment here, because it is unique. It's not, it's not very similar to a lot of other places in the world. And I think from that side and from your experience, having dealt with so many different companies, whether that means they're in the UAE or regionally or internationally, what do you think are the 3 topics you feel are consistent challenges for smaller businesses, regardless of industries?
I tend to define the response to that as what I call bandwidth. Yeah. So your larger corporates have a number of different departments that cover different areas, and generally the expertise within those businesses is quite broad. But with your smaller businesses, they don't have the resources to be able to staff up in the same way. And therefore having the bandwidth of thought and capability is a common challenge. That means that the owner or the CEO or whoever's ultimately tasked with growing the business generally has limited people that can support through, strategic thinking or optimizing processes, making the business more efficient. And that tends to be a challenge, and that can manifest itself in many different ways. So we quite often have inquiries to support clients scale. So they've got to a certain size and they're not quite sure what to do next. Yeah, not sure how to get to the next level. And therefore helping them, supporting them through that process and actually helping them achieve it. So we might come in as an interim sales director or a role such as that to help them achieve that. That's one area. Then how I describe optimizing processes and optimizing operations. So quite often, on the flip side of what I've just said, a lot of businesses do scale quickly, but sometimes in scaling as quick as they do, operations don't necessarily keep up with them, and therefore they become inefficient to a certain degree. And you can find that the owners, the founders of the business, are spending more time on operational matters than they are on client or market related matters. So helping them sort out the operations and streamlining also tends to be quite common. And then finance. Finance is always an issue for any growing business. How do you finance that growth? And therefore helping them think through and achieving that the financing ambition to support ultimately the growth that they're seeing in the business. So, but all of that ultimately comes back to one thing, and that's bandwidth of capability within the organization to, one, to be able to identify these types of issues, and then two, to be able to deal with them and lead change programs. And therefore that's where we as an organization fit in. Our team are all experienced people in their field. They're all partner level individuals, and therefore they have the ability to spot these problems and then work with the owner manager or the CEO to deal with them and to move forward.
Yeah. So bandwidth, so with people, operations, are we talking about things like supply chain, logistics, just looking at processes and trying to, let's say, cut costs from that perspective as well? Is that what we're...
It could be that. It could be a whole host of different areas within the business, but ultimately operational efficiency. So kind of how do you take time out of the owner's diary that is internally focused versus externally focused? How do you have an operational smooth process that enables that to happen? And that could be there aren't enough functions internally, or there isn't enough capability within the functions internally, or there's no clearly defined processes that need to be adopted and followed to make that the operation streamlined. So it can be a combination of things.
Yeah. I'm quite interested as well in the financing side of things, because right now we're seeing a move where there's a lot of private credit coming into the region. What are your thoughts about that? Moving away a little bit from perhaps banks and the sort, and moving more towards the private side of things. How do you think that's going to change the market? Because that didn't really exist up until very recently, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, credit has always been a challenge for smaller businesses, particularly those that are what we describe as asset light. So lenders like to collateralize their lending, and that's easy when you've got an asset-heavy business than asset-light. And therefore, the ability to access debt capital has been a challenge, which drives you down the equity route. So quite a lot of the work that we see is actually equity offerings as opposed to debt. So I think it's probably still early stage for that, but I would see it as a positive. Because it's a quicker and a cheaper form of access to capital, assuming that you can cover your debt repayments. That's obviously quite important. So yeah, I would see it positively, but I still think equity finance is going to be the primary source of capital going forward.
And do you find that a lot of smaller businesses here in the region, after several years of trading, not being able to go to that next level, is that number increasing as opposed to what it was before, and hence why this private, credit is there or financing is there, or what's driving that?
Yeah, I would say generally, particularly over the last few years, the buoyancy of this marketplace has been very strong. And therefore, a lot of businesses have grown quite significantly. And the question is, what's next? Yeah, how do you finance that next stage of growth? Or for the founders also, do we take a view to exit at this point and pass it on to somebody else? So there is a lot of what you might describe as deals or M&A type activity, whether that either is bringing in a strategic investor to help get to that next level, where maybe the founders have got as far as they can take it, or the founders saying, we'll do something else now. Yeah, we'll move on and we'll allow the next phase to happen within our business. So a kind of a range of things, but there is a buoyancy, and therefore that drives quite a few transactions of that nature. And we do get quite a few inquiries, whether that's looking to bring in a strategic investor to support the founders, or whether that's the founders actually saying it's time to exit and move on.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a number of M&A transactions and IPO listings happening, especially over the last couple of years, a lot of them in Abu Dhabi. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that that's going to continue, or is it going to slow down a little bit, or how has it been just generally this year as opposed to last year?
It doesn't look like it's going to slow down. I would say particularly in an Abu Dhabi context, there is government support to continue to support IPOs and to continue to support the exchange. I would say by and large what we've seen, they've been government-related entities, yeah, so effectively government-sponsored IPOs, as opposed to the private sector. So I would imagine that the government-backed IPO programs will continue, and we'll see that for the next 2 or 3 years. The question is whether there is the same appetite for the private sector, for the private businesses or the smaller businesses. And there have been some efforts to try and develop junior markets where that's an easier process for the smaller businesses, but that hasn't really taken hold. So I think we'll continue to see a buoyant IPO market, but it'll be quite concentrated into the larger, the government-backed type entities, as opposed to the SME sector. But that's just my view. It's not...
Let's see, we'll check in like 3 to 6 months' time what's going to happen, because it is an unpredictable market, I feel, sometimes. Last year for us, for example, there was a lot that was happening, and we were, riding the wave saying it's going to continue. But then, when this year came, it did slow down quite a bit, a lot of the activities. But I feel like a lot of companies, they want to reap the fruits of their labor. And then continue growth maybe over the next quarter or maybe over the next year. So let's see how things go, I guess, in 2024. But regardless, it's not stopping people coming here. It's not stopping either companies or, like I said, all these financial services firms coming up, or for people to set up their own businesses here. The business community or the ecosystem is quite easy to go around. I mean, it's easy to set up a business just generally, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a huge influx over, I guess, post-COVID of new businesses come to the market, particularly from places like the UK and Europe, where the COVID experience wasn't as good as it was here. And people have realized that in a mobile and a digital world, they can be based here and still run a global business. So, yeah, I think certainly Dubai has seen the output of that.
And from your from your view then, smaller businesses and larger businesses, because I'm assuming you've worked with both different areas. What do you think that smaller businesses lack or that they don't have? Is it the knowledge that they don't have that larger organizations have, or what kind of resources are lacking there?
I don't think there's one answer to that, but I think it goes back to the point I made earlier about bandwidth. Do they have sufficient resource capability at a senior level across all of their functions? And generally the answer to that is no. And quite often you have quite a flat structure where maybe more junior staff will report directly to the owner, as opposed to in a more conventional structure or a larger corporate, you might have a chief financial officer or a chief operating officer or other C-suite executives that will kind of take that reporting burden off the CEO. That's less well defined in the SME space. And therefore, quite often, everything sits on the shoulders of the CEO or the owner. And it's a question of, well, who's their sounding board? Who do they reach out to be able to support their thinking around strategic decision making? And that's where their key challenges tend to be. Yeah. Who do I reach out to? Who's my sounding board? Am I doing the right things? Is there a different way to look at this? And without the internal resource, senior internal resource to brainstorm that, that's where a lot of the challenges lie. And therefore, having an external sounding board is quite important for them.
So if you could think about, for example, some ongoing projects that you have right now with some smaller businesses that you're working with, what are some topics that you're exactly advising them on? Some of the ongoing stuff that you have now, I don't know, it's at the top of your head.
They're quite mixed, which is good because that suits the skills of the partner group. But if I think about some of the projects that have been longer term, the scaling and sales strategy piece is a good project for us. And that's one of our partners working directly with the CEO to essentially take a business that had grown quickly but plateaued to the next level. Recognition that there is a market there, but they're not quite taking the market in the way that they need to. So part of the process we went through was around defining what is that strategy, what is that market strategy and sales strategy that sits behind it, but also how do you then reshape the internal team to be able to take it. So part of it was externally focused, part of it was internally focused. Another project we have is operationally focused, and this is classic. We've grown really quickly. The founders of the business are specialists in their field, but they don't necessarily understand operations. And they're finding that a lot of their time has been dragged into dealing with internal matters. So we've been tasked with identifying what are the issues, how do they reduce their time, and then put in place mechanisms to make that happen. So it's a phased program whereby we identify the issue, come up with the solutions, and then on a part-time basis, one of our partners step in to actually implement that. And then in due course, find a successor who can take it over, and then we step out. We get quite a lot of M&A type activity, so founders who've done really well, been here a long time, it's time to move on. So who do we sell to? Yeah. What is the right exit strategy for us? And in those situations, we work with them through preparatory phase through to exit phase. So owners don't always necessarily appreciate that their business mightn't look as rosy to a third party as it does to them. Yeah. And therefore, there could be some inhibitors within the business that either delay or derail a sales process or cause issues with valuation. And where you've got expectations gap on valuation, you generally don't get a sale. So we'll work with them to make sure those things are not issues at the time that they then go to market.
Owners are like parents, aren't they? It's like their child is their golden child. It's like there's nothing wrong with the business, right?
Absolutely right.
And it must be tough to tell them, like, listen, there is these things. How do you approach that? Do you find that very difficult? Obviously it's not easy for an owner to say, well, I'll give you free rein to, kind of get into the business and fix what's wrong with it. Because let's face it, nobody wants to hear that something's wrong.
And it's not necessarily about being wrong. Okay. It's just a case of if you did things differently, you might get a higher value. You could get a better exit ultimately from it. We don't find that most clients are challenging in that regard. They've got to a point where they want to maximize the exit, but they also get to a point where they want to make sure that their legacy is ongoing as well. And therefore, if it's in the best shape it can be, then that's good for their legacy. We don't tend to find that so much a challenge, although we can find challenges around valuation gaps and expectations. That's normal in any transaction.
Because it's here. Yeah. This is what I expect. I've worked my whole life to get it to there.
And therefore, there's a little bit of sensitivity around how you have the discussion on it's perhaps not worth as much as you think. But at the end of the day, evaluation is it's a technical exercise. There's parameters to follow, and buyers follow it. So it is what it is sometimes.
You spoke a lot about, a few times during this whole time about growing too quickly. I think maybe a lot of businesses feel that growing too quickly is a positive thing, as in, we're doing great. Like, we've opened 5 stores, we've got a warehouse, we've opened a new factory or whatever it is. Is there such thing as, it being negative? And how do you go backwards? How do you retrace your steps to say, okay, this is the moment where we grew too quickly? Is there a timeline? Is there somewhere you can pinpoint, or does that not matter and just, let's just restructure or, find a way to turn around the business?
I don't think growing quickly is a negative necessarily, as long as it's supported by having your infrastructure in place to make that happen. Yeah. And I talked about operational efficiency previously, or having the right people in the team. Yeah. Those types of things. So yes, grow quickly, but make sure that your infrastructure is right to support you with that growth. Otherwise, it can give you issues in the future. And those issues might be losses or lost contracts, or you haven't taken care of a customer well enough, or a whole host of different things because you haven't built the infrastructure to go with it. And quite often we will be asked to support at the point in time where it has gone wrong and there have been issues. Yeah, so it's more of a reactive approach to that journey as opposed to a proactive approach to that journey. And sometimes a conversation with owners about the proactive approach is difficult to have. And the reason it's difficult to have is because things are going well. Things are going well in their chosen markets with their chosen products and clients. And sometimes only when it starts to go wrong or there's a downside do they realize that things need to be changed. Not everybody, but it can happen.
Yeah, like I know, a few companies that, I've been speaking to recently where sometimes you hear about the number of people that work at the organization, or, kind of like their vision and them wanting to probably do too much, probably run before they can walk. But we hear things like, the finance team of such a small business has 10 people. It's like, do you actually need 10 people? But then you find out that a lot of the stuff is manual. So what do you think about automation coming into this? Is this going to be a really big cost saving for companies? Should they consider it? Because on one side, yes, it can cut costs for you. But I've also heard this many times that, they've gone on spending too much money to implement a system. It doesn't really work. They haven't really seen the return of investment on it, and all that money's gone. So how do you see that?
Well, we do work with a lot of businesses that are not as well automated as they need to be, or digitized. And you're right, you can quite often see situations where there are multiple systems in organizations that have functionality, but they're not always used in the way that they need to be, or they're not providing the information or the data that they should be, or they don't speak to each other, and therefore they need to be integrated. So it's a difficult one to answer sometimes in terms of what do you do, but I think before you embark on any kind of automation or digitization program, you need to think about what is the end result? What do I actually want this to achieve? And do I understand what it is I need to achieve? And quite often there can be lower cost solutions to the problem as well, as opposed to large ERP implementations or expensive solutions. So not one answer. We do tend to see a lot of or a lack of automation within companies. But in order to rectify that, you need to be working with the right people, and you also need to understand what output you want from it. Otherwise, you can get into a situation where you have multiple bolt-on type systems and solutions that actually aren't necessarily the right answer, don't necessarily give you the right output, and don't speak to each other. So therefore, that increases the level of manual activity that exists in the business.
Yeah, like for us, 3 years, well, 2 years in Alchemy Search and 1 year before that, we've so far implemented 3 systems.
Right.
Well, once was manual. We just did everything manually, but obviously as you scale the business, that's impossible to, keep, because then it's just going to be one massive file that everybody just puts things on. One of the other systems just didn't work for us. We couldn't figure it out, to be honest. It just didn't work for us. And now we've moved on to another one. And to be honest, sometimes you're so far deep in it that you're just, no, I'm just going to use this. I'm just going to try to make this work for me. And never really look at other options because, once you choose one, it's hard to change people's habits or make them do, some compliance or stuff like that. Like, this is how we do it, right? Because it changes so much. It's not an easy one with systems at all, because if people are used to something, how do you change that?
Yeah, and choosing the right person to help you with it's not straightforward either. There's a lot of vendors out there. Yeah.
Yeah,
it
loads.
is a challenge for businesses.
Yeah, loads.
I don't have a magic wand for that, but
no, you'd have to choose one. That's right. And would you say that for different types of businesses, then systems, there are some systems that would make more sense than others, or, for example, if it's a manufacturing business, would it be, that's one specific software, or is it more on the business need, nothing to do with industry, or?
I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, it's a bit of both. But ultimately, it's a question of what do you want it to do for you and what information do you want from it?
Yeah.
Because if you're not getting the data that you need to be able to help run your business, then it's not performing for you.
So after you left the Big Four, you've obviously chosen to stay in the UAE and in the Middle East. Why did you decide to stay here? Like, why not set up the business in, I don't know, the UK? Or why not set up the business in, because you're catering to clients all over the world, right? You could have been anywhere. Why the UAE?
Well, one, I like it. It's home. It's been home since 2007. So that's part of the decision making. And it's, I think, so I can compare it directly to the UK because that's where I was from. I think the ease of doing business is better in the UAE than it is in the UK. The government initiatives and what the UAE has achieved over the years and what it wants to continue to achieve just fosters that business environment. And I think therefore being able to deal with people, to network with people, to work with people is a lot easier here. And therefore it's a great place to establish businesses. And I think you see that with new entrants to the market, not just in our space, but generally in any space. It's seen as a business-friendly environment. And I just think it's been an easier process for us to establish something from scratch, a startup ultimately, to where we are now. And we're still very early stage in our journey. I don't think we would achieve that if we were somewhere else.
Okay. So, and if it wasn't the UAE, hypothetically, where else in the Middle East would you think you would have set up the business? If we could just confine it to the Middle East, is there somewhere that also has the ease of business or coming up to have the ease of business, or what do you think?
Without wanting to be too controversial, I'd say no, probably not. The ease of doing business here, but also you need to look at the market dynamics. So if we look at what we do, we're senior people providing support to owner managers and SMEs to their C-suite. If you look at the dynamics of our other regional economies, particularly the larger ones, that's not really the market sector that's a focus right now. If I take Saudi, for example, a lot of what's happening there is change at a governmental level and large-scale projects. We're not a business that has been established to focus on those. I think there'll come a time, maybe in a couple of years' time, where there is a market there for us. Yeah. So it's kind of, yes, it's the right business environment, but I think it's also the right macroeconomic environment for us to flourish. And I'm not convinced that's elsewhere in the region at the moment.
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet.
Maybe it will take some time. I don't want to put number of years on it because people always say Saudi is 10 years behind. I don't know whether that's true. I don't know. Maybe it's more. We don't know really that number, but we will see how that goes. So when you came to the UAE, did you think you were going to stay this long, or how long did you think you were going to stay?
I came with an open mind and 2 young children. So we didn't define it in years, we defined it in experience. And we enjoyed the experience. And I remember right at the beginning, our son at the time was 10. Yeah. And he found it a little difficult to leave his friends at school. So it was a challenging opening for us, but he quickly got used to the environment and loved it and enjoyed it. And I think from looking at the kids and how they are now and how internationally minded they are and the friend groups that they had, it's been perhaps more of a great experience for them and their development from a young age than it has ours. But we still enjoyed it. My wife loves it here. I don't think she would swap the sun for the freezing cold winters of the UK anymore.
The rain and the clouds, no.
So we came with an open mind and no fixed agenda. Also at the time, with PwC, it was very early stage in that firm's growth agenda. And obviously it's gone on to achieve fantastic things over the last 16 years. And it was it was good and a privilege to be a part of that journey as well and help build that firm in the way that it's grown.
So it was a great place to raise kids because a lot of people, especially in the UK, like all parts in the world, they always are on the fence about raising their kids in the UAE because of it being like a bubble or them not being, or the kids not learning life lessons, Surely you don't agree with that because obviously, you've raised your kids here and you said also it's probably had a big impact on them. Do you think it makes kids more well-rounded, just dealing with different nationalities, different people, or, I'm sure you have friends as well that say the same thing to you. What do you say to them?
I think it's within the parents' own hands as to how they raise their children. Yeah. And if you choose to have nannies raise your children, then you get the output of that. If you choose not to do that, then I think there are many benefits for being here. I wouldn't say kids are necessarily as streetwise as they would be in the UK or the US, but in terms of them developing as international citizens, I think it's been a great experience for them, and I fully advocate it. I say my children's friend groups were from all over the world, very different nationalities. So that's very normal for them, which in the world that we live in, where there isn't necessarily that tolerance everywhere, I think it's a great added benefit for them. So I think it's within your own hands as a parent as to how they're raised here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you've been an advisor for a really, really long time.
Yes.
Was there any moments for you where you thought, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to do something else? And if you did, like, what was it? What would you decide to do?
Interesting question. I didn't actually join to be an advisor. I wanted a qualification. So I joined to get the chartered accountancy qualification. And then I think things just evolved after that as they do. If I wasn't an advisor now, what would I have wanted to be? I'd probably enjoy being a CEO, if I'm honest. I think the skills I've learned and the experience I've got would fit quite nicely for that. A balance of being able to have a vision, have a view, have a strategy, but also at the same time lead and manage teams has been something I've always enjoyed in my career. But outside of business, I've always had an inkling to want to be a detective. Which seems a strange...
You have the look for it.
Strange thing to say, but I like solving problems and I quite enjoy watching detective programs and yeah. So if I wasn't in the world of business, it would probably be a detective.
CIA agent.
Well, CID.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. You definitely have the look for it. I would not go through investigation with you, that's for sure. So we hope that the podcast has provided enough insight from Steve about, how to grow and scale owner-managed and small businesses. If, of course, you're looking for any help, get in touch with Steve directly. But I really hope that this was very useful to everybody, and see you on our next episode.